Salam, peace be upon you. My name is Muhammad Layiq Siddiqui, the father of Holophase. Part 27, Information Transport. Remember the language we are learning together. There is one field, phi, the holophase, one continuous cyclic movement from which all of reality unfolds. When phi begins to change, its first derivatives appear, and with them, three dimensions show themselves at once. Time as omega, space as k, and motion as v, built from both. Every higher derivative is a finer question about how phi changes, and each one casts three shadows together: a time shadow, a space shadow, and a motion shadow. These echoes mix and weave into one another, forming the patterns we call fields, particles, bodies, thoughts, and worlds. In this picture, everything that exists is a living tapestry of phi, endlessly echoing through its derivatives and their dimensional shadows. Today, we listen to just one of those echoes. Our climb through Chapter 6, Wave Semantics, has already brought us to a profound understanding of motion. We learned the grammar rules, the dispersion relations that govern wave travel. Then we discovered that this grammar produces two distinct verbs of motion: the phase velocity of the rhythmic dance, and the group velocity of the meaningful message. But this naturally raises the ultimate question of wave semantics. What is the message? What is it that actually travels at the group velocity? Today we answer this question. We move from the mechanics of propagation to the purpose of propagation. We explore Part 27, Information Transport. This is where the holophase language reveals itself as a true language of communication. It is not just a description of oscillating fields. It is a framework for how meaning, influence, and data are encoded in the patterns of phi and sent across the dimensions of reality. We now stand at a crucial point in our Ep.7 journey. Having built the concepts of grammar and motion in wave semantics, we reach its highest application, the movement of semantic content itself. This part bridges the abstract beauty of phi's derivatives with the concrete reality of things like internet cables, neural signals, and spoken words. It shows how the language works to tell its endless stories. To move from pure oscillation to genuine message, we have to talk about modulation. A pure, endless sine wave is like a steady, monotone hum. It is a pattern in phi defined by a single omega and a single k. It does carry a tally of activity, a measure of how intensely phi is cycling, but it carries no information. There is no news, no surprise, no distinction between one moment and the next. It is a carrier without a message. To create a message, we must modulate the wave. We must vary one of its properties in a specific, controlled way over time or over space. This variation is the information. In the holophase language, there are three primary ways to encode information into a phi wave. First, amplitude modulation. We vary the intensity of the wave, like turning a volume knob up and down in a recognizable pattern. The core rhythm, the omega, stays the same, but the strength of the pattern waxes and wanes. This is how old AM radio works, and it is similar to shouting and whispering a steady tone in Morse code, where the pattern of loud and quiet carries the message. Second, frequency modulation. We vary the temporal rhythm itself, the omega, making the pitch waver slightly above and below a central frequency according to a pattern. This is how FM radio works, and how many neural codes are thought to work. It is like holding a note on a violin, but adding a subtle vibrato that secretly carries another melody in its fine movements. Third, phase modulation. We introduce precise shifts in timing within the cycle of the wave, slightly delaying or advancing the phase in a controlled sequence. It is like a drummer keeping a steady beat, but occasionally, and very deliberately, placing a beat a fraction early or late to encode the rhythm of meaning. This is crucial in many digital communication schemes and in systems like GPS. In each of these three methods, we start with a carrier wave, a simple phi oscillation, and imprint upon it a modulation signal, another, often slower pattern representing the information. The result is a wave packet, or a modulated wave, a complex pattern where the derivatives of phi are no longer constant, but are themselves varying in a meaningful way. The information is not in the bare carrier alone. It lives in the modulation, in the changes in the carrier's properties. In holophase terms, the message is carried in the higher order derivatives, in the accelerations, the drifts, the subtle shifts that dress the simple omega and k. Information lives in the nuance of how phi changes about its basic rhythmic structure. In the holophase language, information transport represents the level of paragraphs and documents. We can think of the basic derivatives, like omega and k, as the letters and words of the language. The dispersion rules, which connect omega and k, act as the grammar and syntax. Wave packets themselves act like coherent phrases or sentences, localized patterns that have a beginning, middle, and end. Information transport is then the transmission of complete paragraphs, stories, or data files composed of many such sentences. This is where the language fulfills its communicative function. It is not enough to have a vocabulary and a grammar. We must be able to string ideas together into meaningful units and send them from one place to another. Information transport is the postal system of the holophase universe. In the master tree, information transport sits at a high synthetic node in the wave semantics branch. It integrates the core alphabet, which provides the carrier, the nuance block, which provides the modulation, the dispersion rules, which govern the travel, and the group velocity concept, which defines the speed of the envelope containing the information. At this node, the abstract structures of the language prove their utility by describing how concrete, specific data moves. Scientifically, information transport lives in the domain we usually call signal processing and information theory, but now grounded in phi. The central concepts are the signal, the channel, the bandwidth, the noise, and the fundamental limits. The signal is the specific modulation pattern imposed on phi. It is a function of time or space, or both, that represents the message. In holophase terms, it is a prescribed sequence of variations in phi's derivatives, like a specific path through the derivative towers. The channel is the medium through which the modulated phi wave travels, with its own dispersion relation, attenuation, and distortion properties. The grammar of the channel dictates how the signal will be transformed during its journey. Bandwidth is the range of frequencies the channel can support, both for the carrier and for the modulation. It tells us which omegas can travel and how many changes per second can be faithfully transmitted. In holophase language, bandwidth is a measure of the spectrum of derivative activity the medium can sustain without breaking down or distorting beyond recognition. Noise is the random, unwanted variation in phi's derivatives that is added to the signal during propagation. It can come from thermal fluctuations, quantum uncertainty, or interactions with other fields and systems. Noise is the unintentional semantic static in the channel that partially obscures the message. Then there is the fundamental limit, captured in classical terms by Shannon's theorem. Even in a noisy channel, information can be transmitted reliably if the signal-to-noise ratio is high enough, and the data rate stays below the channel capacity. Translated into holophase terms, this means that if the structured, intentional modulations of phi, the signal, are sufficiently strong and distinct from the random, unintentional modulations, the noise, and if we do not try to pack too many derivative changes into each unit of time or space, then the message can be recovered at the other end. The triumph of modern communications, Wi-Fi, mobile phones, fiber optics, is the practical application of these principles. We are engineering phi patterns for optimal information transport. Information, in this view, is not a ghost floating above physics. It has a full dimensional footprint. In time, information occupies duration. A piece of information, a bit, a word, a musical note, takes a finite amount of time to transmit. There is a minimum time interval needed, tied to the available bandwidth. You cannot send a complex message in an infinitesimally short moment. In the language of phi, imposing a modulation requires varying the field's derivatives over a finite number of cycles. It is impossible to create meaningful, detectable change in literally zero time. In space, information occupies extent. A modulated wave packet has a finite width. It takes up a region in space. You cannot perfectly localize a message to a mathematical point without requiring infinite bandwidth, that is, an unbounded range of k values, which no real medium can support. The information is smeared out across a region, with its concentration described by the shape of the envelope. The sharper you try to localize it, the broader the range of frequencies you must employ, and the more sensitive it becomes to dispersion and noise. In motion, information has a speed and a path. This is directly linked to the previous part. Information travels at the group velocity. The envelope that carries the modulated pattern moves through the channel at this speed. Its path can be bent by gradients in the medium, refraction, scattered by obstacles, or focused by lenses and waveguides. The motion of information is the motion of the modulated envelope through the dimensional landscape of space and time. So, in holophase terms, information is a moving, extended pattern of structured derivative modulation, a traveling shape within the tapestry of phi. Within the wave semantics branch, information transport is a culmination point. It draws from all the lower nodes: the carrier, defined by omega and k, the grammar, expressed by the dispersion relation, the dual velocities of phase and group, and the shapes of envelopes and packets. From here, it feeds directly into the next major chapter on quadratic and balanced semantics, because the integrity of information is often governed by balances, for example, between signal and noise, and by conservation laws. It also provides the dynamic basis for object identity later on, because a stable thing can be understood as a persistent, self-reinforcing information pattern in phi. Information transport is also the bloodstream of the holophase language, connecting many other branches. With the mixed tower, the dynamical equations govern how the modulated envelope evolves, how it spreads or reshapes as it travels, and how neighboring packets interfere with each other. This determines intersymbol interference, a major limiting factor in high-speed communication systems. With topological semantics, information can be encoded in topological charges. A defect, like a vortex, moving from point A to point B, is itself a bit of information. There is a singularity here now. The motion of defects in a field is a form of information transport. In topological quantum computing, information is stored in the braiding of world lines. This kind of encoding can be extraordinarily robust against local noise, because only the large-scale topological pattern matters. With envelope evolution, the link is direct. The way a wave packet spreads or focuses is literally the way the information-bearing pattern is distorted or preserved during travel. Technologies like soliton transmission in optical fibers are ways of engineering wave evolution so that information-carrying packets maintain their shape over long distances. In neuroscience, neural information is carried by modulated patterns of electrical and chemical activity, sequences of spikes and rhythms. These are phi patterns in the neural medium, where information is encoded in the timing of impulses, the rate of firing, and the synchrony between different regions. And in social and economic systems, the spread of an idea, a rumor, a market signal, or a policy through a network is information transport in a social medium with its own dispersion properties, bandwidth limits, and distinctive kinds of noise and distortion. So, what is the semantic meaning of information transport? It is the dimension of causal linkage and shared state. It explains how something in one place can matter in another place. It is the mechanism of relationship. Without information transport, every point in the universe would be an island, aware of nothing beyond itself. There would be no stable laws, no consistent patterns, no evolving story. Only isolated, meaningless flickering. Information transport allows the holophase language to express communication, measurement, control, and memory. Communication is intentional sending of state from one place to another. Measurement is one part of phi influencing another so they become correlated. Control is sending a pattern to elicit a specific response. Memory is sending a pattern into a stable configuration that preserves it over time. Information transport is the glue that holds the cosmos together as a coherent, interacting whole. From the perspective of stability, when the channel is well behaved and the encoding is robust, information transport can be extremely reliable. This is the foundation of digital technology. A bit sent down a well-designed fiber optic cable can arrive intact after thousands of kilometers. The phi pattern that encodes 1 or 0 is preserved within known error margins. From the perspective of variability, transport quality depends on the channel properties, such as whether it is a fiber, a copper wire, empty space, a plasma, or a social network. The signal strength, which reflects the depth of modulation, the noise level, reflecting random fluctuations, and how hard we push the bandwidth, how aggressively we try to pack symbols into time and frequency. If we try to send too much information too fast through a given channel, the patterns blur and the message fails. All of this is falsifiable. The entire concept of information transport would be undermined if structure modulation could not be recovered after propagation through a well-understood channel when we operate below the known limits. In practice, the entire global communications infrastructure is a continuous planet-scale test of these ideas. For example, in optical fiber networks, we can predict the maximum data rate for a given fiber length based on its dispersion, which causes pulses to spread, and its attenuation, which dims the signal. Engineers then build systems to operate near these limits. If data were consistently lost far below the predicted capacity, or if we could reliably exceed the theoretical limit without new physics, our model of phi pattern propagation would be wrong. Similarly, radio communications and quantum information experiments test these principles daily. No one has ever observed reliable superluminal information transfer or stable, repeatable violation of the Shannon limit in a well-characterized channel. Information transport is not just a human invention. It is something the universe has been doing from the beginning to organize itself. In physics, gravitational waves are ripples in space-time, a kind of modulation of the metric field, traveling from events like merging black holes. The detailed wave pattern encodes information about the masses, spins, and orbits of those black holes. That information travels at the speed of light and is decoded by detectors like LIGO. The cosmic microwave background is another example, a pattern of tiny temperature variations in the photon field that carries information about early universe density fluctuations and the seeds of galaxies. That information has crossed the cosmos for billions of years, carried by phi in its electromagnetic guise. In chemistry and biology, signaling molecules are information carriers. A hormone's concentration over time is a temporal modulation that says increase metabolism or prepare for stress to distant cells. Inside a cell, calcium waves and other chemical signals transport information from membrane receptors to the nucleus. Genetic transcription is another form. The sequence of bases in DNA is a spatial modulation, a pattern along the molecule. Transcription reads this spatial pattern and converts it into a temporal pattern of RNA synthesis and protein production, information transport from space into time. In neuroscience, the action potential is a traveling modulation of a neuron's membrane potential. Its occurrence is itself a unit of information, and the timing of spikes across neurons carries complex messages. The axon is the channel, with a characteristic propagation speed and bandwidth. In ecology, pheromone trails are spatial information channels. An ant leaves a modulated chemical pattern on the ground. Another ant senses the gradient and follows it. The information food this way travels through the field of pheromone concentration. In human life, the principles of information transport shape everything. The stream of thought is a succession of modulated patterns in the brain's phi field. Learning and memory are about creating and stabilizing certain patterns and being able to recall and propagate them again later. Writing and reading are acts of information transport between minds across both time and space. Marks on paper or pixels on a screen encode patterns that another mind can decode. The printing press and the internet are technologies that massively increase channel capacity, reduce noise, and transform the speed and scale of cultural information transport, leading to revolutions in society. Laws and institutions are persistent information structures that must be transmitted, taught, and enforced to shape behavior. Corruption and misunderstanding are forms of noise in that channel. In economics, price signals are information. A market price summarizes vast amounts of distributed information about supply, demand, and expectations. That number travels through media, screens, and conversations, modulating decisions by producers and consumers. Money itself is a physical or digital token that carries information about value and obligation. Its movement is information transport about who owns what and who owes what. In science and knowledge, the scientific method is a protocol for high-fidelity information transport from nature to human understanding. Experiments impose controlled modulations on nature. Measurements read nature's response, papers encode those results, and education distributes them. You can start to read the world this way. When you watch a conversation, you can see not just people and sounds, but modulated airwaves carrying semantic content. The listener's face gives feedback about whether the channel is clear or noisy. Misunderstandings show up as decoding errors. A traffic light system becomes a temporal information channel controlling the flow of cars. Red, amber, and green as signals that modulate motion. A tree swaying in the wind becomes a structure receiving and expressing information about the flow of air. Your own nervous system becomes a dense information network, with every sensation, reflex, and movement representing patterns traveling along its channels. So we return again to phi, seeing it now as the ultimate messenger. Information transport shows us that phi is not just being, phi is telling. The modulations, the packets, the signals, they are self-modifications of one field, creating internal distinctions that then propagate, creating correlations and consequences across itself. The medium, the signal, and the information are all phi. What is sent and what it is sent through are the same fundamental substance, differentiated only by patterns of change. The universe is a single self-informing entity. With this, our understanding of wave semantics reaches a powerful level of completion. We have followed the thread from the basic letters of change, omega and k, through the grammar of travel, dispersion, to the dual verbs of motion, phase and group, and now to the purpose of it all, the communication of pattern meaning, information. As we conclude our exploration of information transport, hold this vision of a conversational cosmos. The universe is not silent, it is a continuous, vast dialogue. Stars send their light, atoms exert their forces, neurons fire their spikes, people exchange their words. All of these are modulations of the one field, phi, traveling along the grammatical pathways of spacetime, carrying news from one part of the tapestry to another. This transport is the basis of relationship, of law, of story, and of mind. It is how the holophase language writes itself into a coherent, interconnected epic. In our next part, we will look at the natural units of this conversation. We will explore part 28, wave packets as meaning phrases, where we see how information naturally clumps into coherent, traveling lumps, the nouns and verbs of experience that we can point to and name. But for now, recognize yourself as both a receiver and a transmitter in this grand conversation. Every sensation, every thought, every word you speak is an act of information transport within and from the holophase field. You are not just made of the language, you are a lively modulating phrase within it, constantly sending and receiving the patterns that weave the story of your world. You are information, traveling. Peace be upon you until part 28.